Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, in Tampa, Florida, local, state, and federal investigators are trying to figure out how LSD got into a Walmart steak that sent a 9 months pregnant woman, her boyfriend, and her 2 daughters to the hospital. No need to investigate. It's quite obvious what's happened here. You've heard of shrinkflation, where they shrink the packages to hide inflation. Well, this is a psychodeloflation, where they use psychedelics to convince you that your stingy little $5 steak is actually 10 feet tall. Look, honey, this steak is so huge, and it tastes like rabbit. Yes, psychodeloflation is MK Ultra for monetary policy, Stacy.
Max, there's loads of psychodeloflation happening in headlines across the world in the last few years, but it's accelerating. People are getting more and more stoned on this LSD-laced monetary policy. So I want to look at this tweet from MarketWatch. U.S. stocks enter their 6th year of a bull market tomorrow, the strongest since World War II. If you look at the chart here that they give with it, it's all the markets are up. The top is the green, and it is the post-1982 recession. This is when you participated in, Max. And below that is the yellow line, and that's today's so-called recovery. And the light blue further down, the third most powerful, is World War II, post-World War II.
Yeah, I think the difference, the 1982 to 1987 stock market rally was fueled primarily by cocaine. Apparently, this stock market rally is fueled by LSD. That's the big difference. The cocaine of the 80s made everybody feel invincible, and they bought stocks until the crash of '87. Here, the LSD of this era is making people feel psychodeloflation. They think that these earnings are 10 feet tall, when in fact they're backed up with nothing, and the wealth and income gap has never been higher, even higher than it was in the 1920s, which led to the crash of '29 and the Depression. So clearly we're on suicide watch.
Well, I want to look at the equivalent of the LSD-laced steak from Walmart is the Fed policy and the government intervention. And that is, global debt exceeds $100 trillion as governments binge, BIS says. The amount of debt globally has soared more than 40% to $100 trillion, according to the Bank of International Settlements. And they say the $30 trillion increase from $70 trillion between mid-2007 and mid-2013 compares with a $3.86 trillion decline in the value of equities to $53.8 trillion in the same period, according to the data compiled by Bloomberg. As
we said, in the 2007-2008 period, capitalism would not be allowed to prevail, but state-controlled socialism for banksters would be imposed, which means a command and control method of 0% interest rates as dictated by the Politburo of global central bankers, who added $30 trillion of fiat nonsense into the economy, fiat LSD into the economy, driving debt to $100 trillion, which is the number they spoke about at Davos not, 3 years ago. They said that they would need to recapitalize the global economy for $100 trillion. At the time, people thought that seems like a lot. But here we are, 2014, they need $100 trillion to recapitalize the global economy. And the asset prices, so-called, are floating on the LSD of 0% interest rate. And Janet Yellen is obviously the Jefferson airplane of our era, the gray slick of monetary policy makers. She's 10 foot tall. She sees a bunny rabbit in every pot.
Well, a few things here. So it's 30 trillion so far to get to 100 trillion. So they still have 70 trillion more that they think they need. The other thing is that there's been a decline in equities equal to 3.86 trillion. So where did all that 30 trillion go, right? Well, one of the things that has happened in that time is austerity and cuts to the people. Their wages have declined. Real wages for most people, the bottom 99%, have actually declined. So just like LSD or psychedelics can make people hallucinate things are bigger, they could also hallucinate you're smaller. In this case, they've really become a smaller part of the economy. Their wealth has declined, their true value to the economy has declined, and everything seems bigger, even if the market is actually shrinking?
The wages around the world have gone down, but the number of billionaires and the net worth of billionaires has gone up. So the billionaires who are now sitting on many trillions of dollars, I mean, the increase in trillionaire wealth last year was in excess, I think, of $2 trillion. So that's part of the $30 trillion you're talking about. It goes directly into the pockets of a very small group of people, and it does not create jobs or wage growth. So that's what we're talking about in terms of monetary policy is hooked directly into the pockets of the kleptocrats. It bypasses the economy, the general economy, the real economy. They've financially engineered using drugs like LSD-tainted steak at Walmart to create a population that thinks it's normal that their wages would go down while billionaires get more billions.
In fact, it is the taxpayer, the one without a job anymore, that is paying, that ultimately is responsible for this government debt, this new $30 trillion in government debt, and also corporate debt. And they talk about the specifics in terms of the United States here. Marketable U.S. government debt outstanding has surged to a record $12 trillion, up from $4.5 trillion at the end of 2007, according to the U.S. Treasury data compiled by Bloomberg. Corporate bond holdings globally jumped during the period, with issuance totaling more than $21 trillion.
When you mention that the amount of debt has increased by $30 trillion, correct?
Correct.
That's what you said. On a base of, let's call it $70 trillion. It's a lot higher, but let's just call it $70 trillion. That's just on those numbers alone, roughly a 50% increase in the supply of debt. So what has happened to the price of debt? That is to say, interest rates and bond prices. Well, bond prices have gone up despite record issuance of debt. Despite a 50% increase in issuance of debt, prices have gone up. So this repudiates every known fact tied to economics. Even Nouriel Roubini, who is financially illiterate, could tell you that when you increase the supply of debt by 50%, you would expect the prices to go down, not up. So clearly, who's buying all this debt? Governments. Mark Carney, Bank of England, Federal Reserve Bank, they have all this debt on their balance sheet, which is only kept alive by 0% interest rates, which are like whether 1920s or other periods before in history, only lasts until it breaks, until it explodes, and then all that debt collapses, interest rates skyrocket. So we're on suicide watch.
I want to look at one of these austerity hit economies, one of these debt hit economies, and that's Ireland, to see the effect of this LSD-laced monetary policy. Dublin house price boom sparks fears over asset bubble. Irish capital's rich postcode areas see 22% increase in property prices while costs outside the capital remain stagnant. Some rich sections of Dublin have seen prices rise by 2/3 in the past 9 months. So that's genuinely a case of hallucinatorily looking at, like, wow, in 9 months, look how big the value of our gains are.
Well, let's go back to medieval times. The church got very wealthy with indulgences. So they would say, you know what, we'll keep you from hell. You give us a big sack of money. And so all the rich monarchs and aristocrats would give the Pope essentially a big sack of money, and he'd say, okay, you've got a free pass, you don't go to hell, you get right to heaven. So the church got really wealthy. Here you have kleptocrats in Dublin who say, give us free interest rates, so we make our house prices go up here amongst our coterie of kleptocrats, and we won't send you guys to jail. We won't send Jamie Dimon's affiliates, you know, the Bank of Ireland, those other big Irish banks that were caught with the red-handed stealing money. We won't send you to jail if you give us scads of money, and we'll make your real estate prices go up. So it's just a medieval indulgences played out in modern-day Ireland with central banks.
So you have, on the one hand, you have this LSD-laced monetary policy, and the other thing is that providing this hallucination of house price rises is the fact that the banks and the government, NAMA, own most of the properties. There's 700 ghost estates still in Ireland, 700. There's 2.1 billion euros of mortgage arrears. Most of that, 1.8 billion euros, is 12 months in arrears. So there's a lot of supply, but the banks aren't putting it on the market. And this is one of these activists there in Ireland says, quote, David Hall, a co-founder of the Irish Mortgage Holders Association campaign group, said, the latest figures on the mortgage arrears this year show that there were 1,600 empty properties held by the Irish banks that were not on the market. He also pointed out that NAMA, the state agency which bought thousands of properties abandoned by banks and builders after the 2008 financial crisis, has held back 14,000 properties from entering the market. So remember, all of our fiat currency-based world is based on perception. They want you to perceive things that possibly might not be there. They want you to have the perception of you being wealthy, the wealth effect they call it. It might not be true. You might not actually be wealthy, but they want you to think you're wealthy. And that's why we have LSD sort of psychedelic monetary policy. And so let's talk about this 40 years of policy in this fiat currency world where perception is managed and made sure that you feel like you're rich even though you might not be. How the price of everyday items changed over 40 years. This is from Telegraph News, and they're looking at the past 40 years, and they find I've just tightened this down a bit. The pint of lager is up 1,948%. The average detached house is up 1,699%, and Max, the ounce of gold is up the most with 2,952%. Now, one thing they failed to note is the income. And I did see that the ounce of gold in 1973 was 34 pounds. Back then, the average income was 40 pounds 90 a week, which is 20% more than an ounce of gold. So 20% more than an ounce of gold today would be 1,200 pounds a week.
It shows you quite clearly, using gold as your benchmark, as the lens through which you view an economy, which is the way you should view an economy, that these poor Irish people are getting ripped off.
Well, this is in the UK, and obviously we're 50% behind. We're 50% behind because the average wage is more like 600 pounds, not 1,200 pounds. Had you kept pace with the inflation of the gold price, which was immune to the LSD of monetary policy, gold is immune to the LSD of monetary policy.
Yeah, at the end of the rainbow, every leprechaun knows you don't find a pot full of LSD and fiat currency. It's gold. All right, stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more.
This comes from the heart, you know. I've never even seen him in person. For me, this is the image of a hero.
The world's first cosmonaut. Everyone knows his name, but few people ever knew the man. Was Yuri Gagarin's iconic first space flight the product of good fortune or destiny?
He constantly failed to land properly. He couldn't see the ground.
They started throwing punches at him. That was a turning point.
Gagarin, on RT.
Worldwide investigation of fishing industry reveals the hidden in troubled waters of fish farms.
Today you have a pandemic because PD and ISA is spread all over Norway. It's the most toxic food you have in the whole world.
Growing profit defeats officials' inquiry. Furthermore, health restrictions.
I'm sorry, I don't know about that research program, so I can't say anything about that now.
Who really knows what's inside the filet of fish? Filet of fish on RT.
Choose your language.
Good morning from me, Kevin Owen. If bienvenidos a nuestra edición semanal.
Choose the news that concerns you. Choose the opinions that invigorate your mind. Choose the stories that impact your life. Choose the access to your RT.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Peter Bach He's the director of the new documentary called Sell-Off, the Abolition. Am I saying that right? The abolition of the NHS seeking crowdfunding. Am I saying that right? The abolition.
You can say abolition, you can say abolishing.
Yeah,
if
the
you want,
abolishing.
But
Yeah.
abolition should really be the word.
Okay, so
The sad truth.
This is a recurring theme here. It's a horrification. Tell us a little bit about the film.
Well, the film is a very personal film in a sense about a very public tale. And it began in unlikely ways. I was actually approached by a group of doctors who said, we'd like to talk to you about something. And I thought this is very intriguing. And I went to a small basement in Earl's Court in London where there was a group of doctors, almost conspiratorially gathered together. And I went down the stairs into the room and was suddenly bombarded for possibly 2-3 hours with a litany of complaints, a litany of frustrations, and a kind of delight, if you like, of concern and care and proper compassion.
Okay, the NHS, it's a public institution, it's the UK Health Service, it's being cut up and sold off piece by marketeers and privateers and mercenaries. Rank financial mercenaries. Is it wrong to describe the private equity groups and this coalition government as financial mercenaries?
Well, I thought at the beginning, well, I'm not sure, but now I think it is fair to say yes.
Let me jump in and quote Alistair Heath in today's City AM,
Please.
who says, the UK establishment has always been mercenary and generally put growth first. So here's the City AM, Alistair Heath saying, yeah, we are mercenaries. We don't care about life. We care about growth.
Well, I think the original NHS would dispute that point with you and point out to you that there was a very clear and very successful cohesion which was created in the 40s, which involved everybody. And it wasn't even a socialistic mantra. It was, in fact, a thing where the very wealthy could receive health care just as much as the very poor. So I think that was not a profitable concept, but a fair-minded, compassionate, humanistic, and successful.
But this is the problem. Here you have a city luminaries saying that essentially they've let these financial mercenaries loose.
Yeah.
And they're saying, you know, the NHS has valuable assets, income-producing assets that we can sell to overseas investors. A lot of these assets are going to end up in the pension funds of German retirees who will make money on all the NHS properties that are being sold to them. But let's talk about this film, because you're crowdfunding the finishing funds of the film on StartJoin, thanks to our viewers, but it's most of it's in the can already, right? So this is really finishing funds, but you've done most of the principal photography, have you?
We have. We've done a lot of filming. It's essentially like a one-person film in the sense that in order to get it done, I've done an awful lot of it myself. But we have done a lot of filming, and a lot of the editing has been done too. But we do need to get the money to finish it, and the crowdfunding seemed like a very democratic way to do that.
Right.
We're all out of pocket on this film, but we're all very energized by what we've come across and what we've discovered.
Now, the thing about markets, when they're run efficiently and properly, unlike the mercenary markets that Alistair Heath is talking about here in the UK, when you have real, genuine, fair markets, they generate true price signals. So this is a way to calibrate what the actual supply and demand is. Again, if you look at the bond market, there's been a huge supply of bonds, and yet the price has gone up. So that's a failed price signal. But here on StartJoin, which is the crowdfunding site, you have the ability to look at genuine price signals. And I'm looking at this. 15 backers, 15 people in the UK have come forward to put up £1 or £5. That tells me the price signal is that the people in the UK either A, don't care about their NHS, or B, just have no idea that they're having this NHS stolen out from underneath them.
Well, that latter point is a very scary one. I think, in a sense, going back to my point that I started this film, I'm a genuine novice on the subject, and I've ended it almost like a convert. I think it's shocking most of all that people don't know about it. And I think this has worked very well on behalf of the profiteers, as you might call them, because in a sense they have been able to do all this change under the radar, and very few people are aware of the fact that when it comes to their health or their children's health or their parents' health, there will be serious repercussions. They might knock on the door of their local surgery one day and suddenly be presented with a bill.
Yeah, what's interesting, in the U.S., of course, they went through a huge change in the healthcare. They have what's called Obamacare. But that was after and part of a huge outcry that they wanted a change in their healthcare. Tens of millions of people with no insurance, no healthcare. It's a huge drag on the economy. It was obvious that something has to be done and needs to be done. Here in the UK, the healthcare system, it acts as a monopsony, which is the ability of one buyer, in this case the government, to deliver efficient healthcare at excellent quality at the lowest possible price. People, there's no outcry to change it. There's no huge outcry to change it. What's your thoughts on this? Because it's not a mandate from the people. The people are not mandating this, but they're being hoodwinked into it.
Well, exactly. And the biggest surprise that I encountered in the course of what I've done to date on the film was the fact that 30% now of the annual health budget is expected to go towards administration costs linked to the insurance companies, etc., that has happened in the United States. That's 30% of the annual health budget, which at the moment runs at over 100 billion per annum, which makes the NHS perhaps the third largest employer in the world, I think it is. But that's the thing, is we're told that the expenses of the NHS system are too powerful for us to contain, cover, work with, so we have to now privatise it. But that actually makes it even more expensive. And nobody is revealing this fact.
Well, it's more expensive and less effective.
Yeah.
Okay, look at the energy
Far less
industry in this country. It's now been totally thrown over to the 6 oligopolists who deliver much higher costs and service that's highly questionable. And of course, they're sponsoring things like fracking, which, speaking about healthcare, it's a known cancer, carcinogenic. So the people don't seem to care. I mean, then they'll go to the NHS to get cancer cure, but that'll be privatized and in part owned by the energy companies. Because, of course, they're all owning each other. Now, you're a filmmaker, and, of course, we talk about documentaries, and one filmmaker that comes to mind is Michael Moore. And Michael Moore came to this country and said, you know, here's the NHS, and said it's fantastic, and was telling people in America, like, this is the way it should work. So what about going to the U.S. and trying to get people there to understand the shortcomings of a corporate-run health system?
About the United States, that became very clear to me in the course of what I've done so far, is that their market is saturated. The private healthcare market in the United States needs somewhere fresh to go. And it has in its sights the NHS. And it believes that if it can get the NHS and it can cover it and penetrate it and interfere with it and profitize from it, it can show the rest of the world, its next targets, look, we have done the NHS. It's almost like the G4 companies, for example, that are alongside NHS logos, and the refinement, if you like, of a corporate identity when matched with the NHS. So in a sense, the American market, I hate to say, is responsible greatly for what is happening to the NHS, which you must remember is a national treasure. It might be to a sleeping public, it might be to a public who are unaware of what is actually taking place, but nonetheless they do have a rather affectionate and I think rather healthy regard for something which, after all, is pretty fair-minded, even-spirited, and, to use that word again, compassionate.
Well, we see this American marauders in Europe, in Greece. We know for a fact that they colluded. Lloyd Blankfein, the leadership in Greece, John Paulson, a hedge fund manager, colluded to collapse the Greece economy. They profited enormously from the collapse of the economy, and they're now buying assets for pennies on the dollar. Goldman Sachs orchestrated the subprime catastrophe, benefited from the collapse of the subprime catastrophe. So the same American banks, in collusion with the UK banks, the Barclays, the Lloyds, the HSBC, are colluding to destroy a huge income-producing asset that was built up over generations by the British people, to pick it clean of its assets, sell it off to the highest bidder, and leave an enormous amount of debt. It's like, as if Sir Philip Green of Arcadia and the Top Shops, remember? He's loaded a company up with $1 billion in debt through his wife in Monaco, and leaves the company with debt. So here, the NHS will be loaded with hundreds of billions of pounds of debt. And of course, they'll need to cut corners, they'll need to sacrifice service, and people will die. And this
That's right.
coalition government, and again, as Alistair Heath is pointing out, we're mercenaries. We don't care if you live or die, we're mercenaries. It's right there in black and white in City AM. How do the people respond to their own city of London, treating them like cannon fodder?
Exactly. Well, how they will end up having to respond will be a bit like you mentioned Greece earlier, where you have effectively the public being told to empty their medical cabinets of excess drugs they don't need, drop them off at street corners where unpaid pharmacists are involved in redistributing them amongst the needy who don't have any funds to pay for that.
Well, there's a story about Syria today where the healthcare needs are such they have no anesthesia, so they recommend before operations, they recommend people get hit in the head with a steel pipe. That's the guideline in the hospital. Knock out with steel pipe, perform appendectomy.
Well,
okay, that's they think that's what a mercenary thinks like.
Yeah.
That's what Alistair Heath wants in the UK. You go to the NHS, here's a steel pipe, bong, oh, we'll take out your kidney and sell it to the highest bidder to pay off our debt.
But you see, I don't believe, maybe I'm hanging on to this because this is the only thing one has left to hang on to, but I do not believe it's in the true spirit of the British people to want to get rid of the NHS. I believe there is a harmony at the heart of it.
Here's StartJoin. It's a UK company. It's a UK crowdfunding company. 15 people have put up £1 or more for this film on StartJoin. Sell off the abolition of your NHS. So these people, the price signal tells me you're wrong. That the British people, all they care about is their house price. They want cheap money. They want cheap candy, cheap calories, cheap. They want house price appreciation. When it comes to their NHS, they don't give a flying fig.
Well, I'm told that you have many viewers, Max. Perhaps
I have 2 million viewers in this freaking Marmite swirling hellhole, Britain, and they don't give a flying fig.
Yeah, well,
I can tell. That's the signal right there.
Well, let's see the power of Max.
I'd like to see the British people come on force and support the film. So it's basically, as you said, principal photography is shot. What was the biggest surprise for you as the director of the film when making the film so far?
The courage of the doctors who are in the film, in the sense that what they're doing is simply their job. They're putting their patients' interests first. They are very hardworking. We know that they're not underpaid, but nonetheless they are exhausted people, and the fact that at the end of that day, if you like, or night, they have this time to spend another 5 hours a day working towards enlightening people about what is going on was the biggest surprise. I had no idea that tirelessness was an honourable trait.
Well, we've talked to many of the doctors in the NHS, and they talk about how, organically or holistically, they all speak to each other in a way that creates efficiencies that you cannot put a price tag on. If you privatize it, now they're all competing with each other. So the dispensary is competing with the surgeries, and competing with the general practitioners, and pretty soon that's how the prices go up, and that's how the care quality goes down. So you turn the doctors into bean counters and mercenaries. So Alistair Heath should go down there and start performing appendectomies on the weekends. He probably would. If you give him $10, if you give him £10, he'll gladly do it.
Or an iron bar.
Sad. All right, well, anyway, that's all the time we have. Thanks so much, Peter, for being on the Keiser Report.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Peter Bach, who is directing a new film, Sell Off, the Abolition of Your NHS. You can contribute to it on startjoin.com. Come on, Britain, £1 for your NHS for this film? Get on it. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.